So, hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for stopping by. This is an emergency live stream to talk about Donald Trump essentially declaring martial law or threatening to declare martial law in the United States surrounding the George Floyd protests. Basically, Donald Trump earlier today in the Rose Garden, where the president often gives speeches and, declarations, said that he supports protests ostensibly, even though they're crushing protesters outside, is saying that, I will send in the federal military, the United States military, if individual states don't dominate their protesters. That if they don't essentially crush the protesters as they currently are operating, and Trump might mean only the bad ones, quote unquote, but there's no way of enforcing that, and we know Trump means anyone that goes outside of his worldview, then he will send in the military. Now, that's essentially illegal because the Posse Comitatus Act, or Comitatus Act of the 1870s, basically says that you cannot use the U.S. military on your own citizens, and the 1807 Insurrection Act, which is which does give that exception, has been very, very rarely used in modern times, and used more in the case of a natural disaster like Katrina than something like a protest, especially utilized so indiscriminately across the country. Well, Hayes, when I say what he's threatening is that in a legal sense, he hasn't yet declared it, of course. The issue is more that what he's telling the governors is, hey, governors, if you don't play ball on my accord, if you don't do what I would do with regard to protesters, then I am going to send in the federal government upon you. And I think that's a better operation of the term, because you want to be clear that if he hasn't formally done it yet, you want to make a distinction between what Trump has done and what he's planning to do. And this is not me suggesting that he won't go further and actually start formally sending in, military forces in opposition to the desires and will of state elected officials in various states. But so far, his actions quite haven't gone that far. Now, I will say, to be clear, that Donald Trump has indicated at least a partial willingness to do this, to effectively enforce a national security standard on citizens, and that's what he's doing with regard to the national curfew. Basically, he's setting a national curfew, and doing that is maybe a precursor to this more direct involvement. Again, this goes back, guys, to the post-Civil War period. And after the Civil War, there was basically an understanding that U.S. military forces should not be used against the citizenry, right? Like, that's the whole point. It shouldn't be used against the citizenry. And whether or not you agree with that principle, it's been the established U.S. principle for more than a century. And of course, there's always exceptions. Japanese Americans were accosted by, the military during the Second World War, and there's all sorts of exceptions. But in general, the principle has been that you don't simply allow people to be controlled by their own military. Military isn't there to, be the oppositional force to the people. They're there to protect those people, right? And I think that's what we're looking at here. And I know a lot of people here are very concerned. A lot of people are saying that he's a neo-fascist gangster, that Donald Trump, that this is the start of a very, very bad trend. Some people are saying he's already gone there. Some people are making analogies between him and certain leaders from the 1930s in the Central Northern Europe. I don't want to say it because we'll definitely get dinged if I mention a certain guy. So it's really it's really a scary time. It really is. I mean, Winston Smith makes a great point. Trump with the Bible photo op. There's been a long-standing quote, and I forget who it was, but they basically said if, totalitarianism comes to the United States, it won't be from, another country. It won't be in a formal WW2 type scenario. It's going to be, if anything, an American patriot with a cross or a Bible that they're going to wield the insecurities and philosophies that are sort of rooted in the American soil. Some of those are good, and some of those are very bad. And that would be the basis for American, the end of democracy in America. The end of democracy in America will not come, if it does come. Nothing is guaranteed, of course. If it does come, it will come from within. It will. That's my view. Not to say that, outside influences can't play a role. America is not above the world and the influences of the world, but it will come from within overwhelmingly. Right? That's simple as that. Well, the thing is that, exiled, the National Guard is very different than the U.S. military. The National Guard, each state has a contingent, and a state can choose whether or not to utilize its National Guard contingent. That's left up to the states, more or less. So an individual state, say Louisiana or Kentucky or Idaho or whoever, wanted to do that, they could. That's very different than the formal capital M military. And so the Posse Comitatus Act of the 1870s, again, passed after Reconstruction, after the end of the Civil War, basically, as the defeated states started to be reintegrated into the American, society. The reality is that the military proper should not be used in this function, right? That's what it is. That's what it is. Fundamentally, this is the sort of overreach that everybody should be mad about. But I have to say that, guys, Dragon Progressive says Trump handling that Bible weird. Somebody was saying, it looks like Trump held that Bible not only like he's never held a Bible, but that like he's never held a book. And you're right, it's clearly for a photo op, because I'll just grab one book off my shelf here. I'm trying to grab one of a similar size and shape, where he sort of holds the book like this, kind of. Almost like he wants you to see the cover. Now, it doesn't say Bible on it. But, no one holds a book like this, right? And so he's clearly, whether it's trying to portray some sort of imagery, where he wants to make sure that you see him in front of a church holding a Bible on a day where he violates the basic rights of Americans, that's what he's doing, right? And I do see the symbolism is very troubling. Very, very troubling. People are happy that we're talking about this. I think it's great we're talking about this. I think it's great. I think it's important we're all talking about it. Lance said, "Grab your own book, Christo." No, I could have, but probably the only book Trump has ever read is The Art of the Deal, right? But I do find it very interesting where we are. I do find it very interesting. Are people asking if I'm a socialist? Yes, I am a socialist, yes. It has nothing to do with this discussion, because this should be something, of course, that makes socialists mad. Of course, that makes people that are directly oppositional to Trump, of course. But you have to also think that, if you're a small government states' rights kind of guy or gal, the sort of person that supposedly is at home in the Republican Party, then this should be very concerning to you. This should be very concerning. The whole point of of these sorts of acts are to limit federal government encroachment into the states. That's the reason why the National Guard system works, and and you don't have the military. It's that states have their own contingencies to use for emergencies beyond their day-to-day police forces that aren't the military, right? That's an important factor here. And it's very ironic because these are the same people who at the end of the day just didn't want to wear a mask. You know what I mean? Like the violation of civil liberty is not a national curfew, nor is it, basically an encroachment on states' rights. It's people not wearing a mask because local or state government officials told them they should wear a mask. And, they were never forced to, but, they probably should, and this and that and this and that. You know what I mean? Very, very interesting from my perspective. Very, very interesting. Joseph Mangano says he probably didn't read his own book. Well, to be fair to Trump, and I don't often give Trump a lot of credit. Most famous people who have books didn't write their own books, right? They're ghostwritten, to be fair. That's not a Trump thing. That's a most rich people thing. Unless the person's kind of known as an intellectual and things like that, they didn't write their own book most often. Or certainly not on their own. Yeah, Brandon Yates is saying that, this is a kind of a confluence of, the Great Depression, the 1918 Spanish flu, and the 1960s, that sort of the breakdown of the post-war golden era, if you will, kind of all happening at once. And I don't think that's a bad comparison, actually. I think, to be clear, that some of those things were way bigger and some of those things lasted way longer. And we have no way to really understand, frankly, if this event, this pandemic, whatever you want to call it, is going to last forever. We have no idea if the sustained economic downturn is going to be for months or longer or less. We don't know. So to be clear, looking back on it, this might be far, far less significant than any one of those events individually. It doesn't change the fact, though, that we are in a very interesting time, and it feels like it. This is why historians don't write about history as it happens, right? You need distance. You need distance to gather all the sources, but you also need distance to gain a little bit of perspective. But yeah, I feel that. I feel like a whole bunch of stuff is happening. It's only been a week since the George Floyd incident. It's been 1 week, guys. Literally, it's been 1 week. It's crazy. Absolutely crazy. It's only been a week, and this is where we are, right? It's been 1 week. Businesses are not people. Businesses have insurance in many cases. Businesses have, even if some businesses have been affected and there's been GoFundMes for those businesses, but fundamentally, if those businesses, don't come back, those GoFundMes can make a business whole. If someone loses their life, or if someone, loses their sight or their hearing or whatever, as some people have, you can have medical expenses and funds raised to take care of family and to help that person, but you'll never make them whole again. You can make businesses whole again. This is not to say that I don't have some sympathies for small businesses affected by this. I do. But it is to say that a business is not a person. A business is not a person. And conflating the two is absurd. It's absolutely absurd. Absolutely. Karina says, hopefully this is a publicity stunt. I mean, maybe it is. Maybe Trump feels that if he does this, the governors will toughen up. That was one of his arguments. And that if the governors, quote unquote, toughen up, he won't need to do it. And then what Trump will say is, well, I made this step. The governors listened to me. It's, I didn't use excessive government overreach. And as a result, everything's fine. And that'll be the argument he tries to make. I don't know. Though. Like, honestly, I have no clue. I have no clue what's going to happen. Trump will operate based on what he thinks his ideology puts forward and what he thinks will help him win election or tip the political scales in his favor. And if that means a publicity stunt, then yeah, it'll be a publicity stunt. But that's not a guarantee. It's not a guarantee at all. Not at all. One thing some people have said in the comments here, if you guys want to click the like button, that helps the stream. So if you're enjoying this, I see there's some people here. Click the like button. If you're new to the channel, I cover Canadian politics, American politics generally from a left perspective. If you like that, consider clicking subscribe. Yeah, Dafrax makes a good analogy here. Dafrax98 saying Christo holding the Bible is reminiscent of Janine Áñez, who the coup leader from Bolivia, the illegitimate leader backed by Canada and the United States and a whole bunch of other right-wing governments. Basically, when the Morales government was unjustly overthrown, they basically came out and said, the Bible is back in the presidential palace. That the paganism, quote unquote, even though a lot of indigenous people in Bolivia are, in fact, Catholic, they're Christian, they've thrown out the pagan indigenous people, and a European Bolivian is once again president of Bolivia, and she brings a Christian ethos. It was very ugly. Very ugly. Not quite so explicit as Áñez necessarily, but the imagery is similar. Olivier says, I was wishing COVID would stop monopolizing the news cycle. Now I regret that. Well, Olivier, you got monkey's paw on that one, right? The old tale of the monkey's paw, where you make a wish, and then the wish, you get what you wished for, but always in this sort of weird kind of way. The Simpsons did an old Halloween special on that, and I think Olivier got a monkey's paw and made a wish about that. Somebody also made a sports analogy and said, COVID was big in the third quarter, but American racism came right back. And my goodness, isn't that correct? We got a couple super chats here. Always appreciate those. They help sustain and grow the channel. Let me just take a look at these. It's going to reload my screen here. Sometimes it gets a little slow. Neocon says, lock her up and send her back to Spain. Yeah, I can't disagree with that about Áñez. Certainly, can't disagree at all. Emily Page says, you're an honest actor. That's all I can ask for these days. Here's $9.99 for your troubles. Adventurer. Insert clunky animation. Emily, thank you so much for your support and your kind words. That's what we try to do on this channel, right? Like, I do have a bias, right? Like the thing in news is there's no unbiased news unless you're going to read, a robotic transcript. But I try to bring my perspective in an informed and, transparent way. And I think that's the most you can ask for people, to be fair and to be open with what their preconceptions are, so that when you watch them, you can get a sense for, where their opinion is and where their analysis is, and try to get that. So I do my best about that. Like, a lot of people are talking about Biden here. Look, I made a video earlier today. You can go check that out, where Biden himself, didn't have the best take on this issue, where Biden said, look, maybe the solution to what we've been seeing is police should just aim for the leg. And I have to say that that's woefully inadequate. And this, again, isn't to say that Biden is on this issue is just as bad necessarily, because I don't think he's quite there. But I do think that, it's showing that Biden is woefully unprepared to be a leader in this moment. Like maybe in any moment, we know what Biden is, but especially in this moment, he seems woefully unprepared. Like that's my perspective at least, right? So, that's where we are, right? I'm just gonna drop a link here for the stream on Twitter. I dropped it earlier, but I'm just gonna drop it again here because I've had a thread here going. So. Interesting things happening. Anderson Cooper is trending. I'm wondering what he's saying. He's talking to these things. It's all the irony here. As Trump, people are noting that as Trump was doing this press conference, he was basically saying, I believe in peaceful protests, while peaceful protests were being broken up using, tear gas and rubber bullets and, other technically non-lethal, although extremely, extremely dangerous police tactics, right? Jason Kennedy making a great point saying here, America gets two complete idiots to choose from in November. I mean, look, it is awful. And on my channel, just to clarify, I have a lot of viewers who are going to be, no matter what, I'm voting Joe Biden. I got viewers that are like, no matter what, I'm not voting Biden. You got some people who are voting Biden because of tactical voting or because of harm reduction. On my channel, the whole position is like, I don't vote shame. I don't vote shame anybody. Anybody can vote for how they want and get to that vote for any reason they want, right? But I do think it is a tragedy that in a country of, 335 million people? I know there's more than 330. A third of a billion people, let's say. And these are the two best people that the country could muster up to run for president. I gotta say, it's not the best look from my perspective. Not the best look at all. Not the best look for a supposedly great world-leading nation. Like, the thing here, to be clear to Exalted Lioness, like, yeah, you're right. Like, let's also be clear here. Like, there's, these protests have shown that voting, or the context around these protests has shown that voting alone isn't going to be the solution. Because, like, if you go to Minnesota, you go to Minneapolis, right? And you look there, they have a Democratic mayor, and they have a lot of Democratic politicians at the local level. And the majority of the Minnesota congressional delegation is Democratic. And they have two Democratic senators, including a very high profile, I don't think anymore, but was considered a frontrunner to be vice presidential pick, Amy Klobuchar. And then you also add the fact that they voted Democrat even in 2016, which was a losing election. They were one of the few Midwestern states that actually went with the Democrats still. And so all of that, and there was still the George Floyd incident, right? That's the simple truth here, right? So what this is showing is that, yeah, I'm not going to say voting doesn't matter, or even that there aren't some differences between Trump and Biden, or the Democrats and the Republicans, but it is to say that even in areas of the country that do their part and supposedly vote the right way in almost every election, almost every time, this still happens, right? And I think that's what this is about. There's a fundamental disconnect, right? There's a fundamental disconnect that whether or not a certain party has won, there is systematic oppression of poor people, of minorities, of people with disabilities, whatever, any sort of marginalized person by law enforcement. It is not enforced justly. Laws are not applied equally. Force is not applied equally. Sentences are not applied equally. That is a fundamental reality of the American justice experience, and it's like that everywhere. Now, it might be worse in certain parts of the country, but it's like that even in the blue parts of the country. Right? Simple as that. Well, Exalted Lioness, I disagree. Like to say police brutality is an issue, but it's not racial is not true. It's not strictly, it's not universally racial, which is to say there aren't zero instances of, again, people of all backgrounds, especially if they're poor, regardless of their race, facing police brutality. There's no one saying that. No one's saying that. But it is very difficult to deny that the justice system is disproportionately affects African Americans and other minorities like Indigenous people, Indian Americans, and Latino Americans. So and it's not even just with regard to high-profile cases of violence, right? I talked about this Saturday night, I believe. I did a kind of an emergency live stream to cover some of the protests, and what we talked about then was that with regard to cannabis, cannabis in states where it isn't legal. This data is a little bit older. What they found was that white people and black people use that drug in the same proportions or similar proportions, and yet African Americans were far more likely to be face legal consequences for that, and then those consequences were harsher than white people. And so whether it's everything from a George Floyd type incident, the biggest profile thing that leads to somebody losing their life, or whether it's which populations get ticketed more and how much those tickets are worth, if you are poor and if you are a minority, you get affected more. It's as simple as that, without a doubt. This doesn't mean that white people do not face issues with police. No one is saying that, or if they are 100% wrong. But it is to say that the justice system in the United States and Canada, to be fair, especially with regarding Indigenous people, Native people in Canada, is undeniably racially motivated, 100%, historically and today. Yeah, Shane makes a great point. It's race and class. It's race and class and where you live, which is, of course, influenced by race and class. All of these things matter. It truly is a multi-factor thing. And depending on the type of issue and depending on where you are, some of those things matter more. In some issues, your income matters more. In some issues, your skin color matters more. Things like that. Or your perceived citizenship status matters more. Maria Vargad with the super chat asks a great question saying, so do you think Trump is like the president from Brazil, a fascist? I mean, so far at least, Trump doesn't seem to be as brazen as Bolsonaro. In Brazil, Bolsonaro's chief political opponent was jailed unjustly. Lula is now out, but wasn't able to run because he was jailed, even though there's systemic corruption in Brazil. Bolsonaro is, I think, still a level or two worse than Trump, personally, in his rhetoric, in his government style, in his disregard. Like, as bad as Trump has been on COVID, Bolsonaro's been even worse. He's been even worse. So I would say that Trump is not quite where Bolsonaro is, but he's closer to Bolsonaro than maybe people thought just a few weeks or months ago. People are saying they don't know whether Trump or Biden will win. I mean, look, right now, and again, polls are just polls, and the election's a long ways away, and this election is far, far more volatile than any election I think we've seen. But according to the Real Clear Politics average, which isn't, again, it isn't everything, Biden leads by 6 points over Trump. And that means that he's led each one of the last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 polls, including polls like Rasmussen, which are generally seen to be pro-Republican. Now, again, Clinton was leading a lot of polls really big 4 years ago, outside this far from the election. And what happened was the polls got closer and closer. And it also happened that Trump was able to win because of the Electoral College balance. Now, Trump didn't lose by 6 last time. If this poll is accurate, if this average is accurate, and Biden wins, say, anywhere from 4 to 6 points over Trump, there's no way Trump's winning. There's no way. There's no way Trump's winning if that poll is accurate. But there's not a guarantee that these polls are accurate, right? There's not a guarantee. New Cordeliers Club DSA says, do you think Trump is fascistic as Sisi in Egypt? I don't know. Okay, that's a great question, New Cordeliers. I mean, my issue with making that comparison is that, even like to Brazil to some extent, I'm not as much of an expert on those countries, but also different countries have different democratic norms. And so somebody like Donald Trump, you have to look at both what they believe and what they've done and what's possible under the political context in which they become a leader, right? So for instance, you might, for lack of a better term, be a fascist. But if the system of government in which you're in, even with Trump saying potentially declaring martial law, if it limits your ability to enact policies, you might have more right-wing desires than another person, but you won't be able to act on them. So when you have somebody from a country like Egypt, which has more, I guess, let's say less concrete democratic norms, or even Brazil, which has less concrete democratic norms than, say, a country like the United States, you might find some discordances there, for lack of a better term, right? You might see that Trump might have the same views as a Sisi, but the system doesn't allow them to implement them. Too many quote-unquote checks and balances. The press might have a bigger role. The population might not tolerate those sorts of things, and so on and so forth. John Barlich asks, it's a good question. John, thank you for your support. Do these riots help the Dems or hurt them? I'm not sure. I don't know if they're going to have that massive of an effect, given how far out we are, given that it's not even the only thing happening, given that, Donald Trump had the opportunity to appear, I guess, more quote-unquote presidential, and he chose not to, right? Like, he sort of chose not to appear presidential. We're calling for calm. And I think that's what even some governors were saying, like on the phone call with him. Like, we were expecting you to be more regal about this in a good way, right? Like, even Republican governors. Maryland has a Republican governor, I believe. And that Republican governor was saying, look, I was expecting a better response from the president, and I didn't get one. And he was very concerned. And of course, Democratic governors, they have partisan motivations, to a degree. Aren't happy. And so I think that, if Trump's approach is seen as too heavy-handed, then yeah, people might say, look, I don't agree with the quote-unquote riots and the quote-unquote looting and the quote-unquote, aggressive tactics of the protesters, but the president's even worse. And I mean, look, this has only been going on for a week, to be clear, but there has been some polling done that looks good for Biden. So, for instance, the most recent poll was done between May 25th, and May 28th. Now, that's not the peak of this, but this was sort of starting, and Biden was up 10 in that poll, right? So, from my perspective, it might be the case that this doesn't have a massive effect either way. I'm not sure. Lonnie says, great group to look forward to here. Almost ashamed to have Christo. I'll do ourselves. He's a keeper. Here's a $5 challenge. Join $4.99. Thank you so much, Lonnie, for your support. You're always great at touting the channel, and it's great to have you folks here too. That's one great thing about getting a kind of consistent viewership for your streams, is that it's fantastic to see, all the side conversation happening. that people are having debates among themselves, and that generally with my audience, because I have a good audience, I'm very lucky, it stays respectful and kind, right? And people, I actually see people say the extremely rare thing, you've changed my mind. You see that every once in a while, and that's a rare thing for the internet. New Cordeliers Club asks, Christo, what are the chances of a civil war if when the military actually hits the streets? I mean, in terms of these definitions are all relative, right? Like, what is a civil war? I mean, an 1860 to 65 type scenario I see as exceedingly rare, personally. But could you see unprecedented actions by states to use all the powers they have or could reasonably use to push back against Trump? And could you see unprecedented jurisdictional battles between cities, government, states, and the federal government? Yeah. Is that the same as a, Lincoln versus, the South, with the Confederacy type scenario? I mean, I don't think so. There's a whole bunch of reasons why. One, the Confederacy could mostly form a block. Now it's like some of the blue states are on the coast. The coastal states are mostly blue, and then but there's some blue states that are sort of islanded off. And like, how do you connect some of them? It's like I can't see I don't see that happening. Now, would I put the odds at zero? Of course not. I'm not silly, but I would put them pretty low, to be honest. I just don't see that happening right now. I just don't see that. I don't see that. Like, that's what I think. I Comrade Internet says, have you listened to It Could Happen Here? It's about this scenario. I haven't, Comrade Internet, but I think maybe you've told me about it, and certainly I've had other people say something about it. So I'll definitely check it out. But I mean, I do think, I don't want to say it's impossible. I don't think that, I don't know if I would put the odds very high, personally. That's, you know what I mean? A lot of people are saying, look, I can't bring myself to vote for Biden. Again, on this channel, I've made one thing very clear, that I do not vote shame. Some of my viewers will be voting for Joe Biden. They've said, look, very few of my viewers like Joe Biden, to be clear. Very few of my viewers. But some said they will vote for Joe Biden. And they've given reasons why. And I respect those reasons. And other people, they've said the exact opposite, saying look, I get why people want to vote for Biden. I can't do it. Everything from the Tara Reade story to Biden's bad legislation to his bad policy platform this time to the DNC not respecting progressives, whatever the reason. And I respect those viewpoints. This is not a channel where I'm going to go at my viewers or another YouTube creator and say, how dare they say they're not voting for Joe Biden? That's my position. 100%. Northern Populist saying, sending a socialist some money, LMAO. Does this mean you want the looting and rioting to continue? That would show Antifa's true colors as agents of chaos. I mean, well, Northern Populist, thank you for the support. It's always hard to say if you're populist. I mean, Tommy Douglas was a Northern Populist, I guess in a sense. So it's always hard to tell from the names alone. Look, at the end of the day, fundamentally, these sorts of things go beyond the jurisdictional effects. Even during much more tumultuous times in American history, this approach wasn't taken. And the country didn't fall apart. The country, even during those times, was more prosperous. Workers made more money. There was higher unionization rates. University cost $42. there was a better society, and that society didn't go away because people protested. If anything, that society went away, and the rise of more inequality and insecurity for the 99% went away because people stopped protesting, because they stopped, quote unquote, rioting. And so in terms of rioting and looting, yeah, do I want those things to happen? No, but I don't want the protests to stop until people feel like their grievances have been addressed. And I don't think that Trump, or even frankly Joe Biden's, addressing those things. And I think that's an important factor. That's an important factor, right? That's kind of what I'm looking at. And, Donald Trump's approach is an overreach. Much like Justin Trudeau's, or Pierre Trudeau, his approach was an overreach with the War Measures Act, where the vast majority of Canadians supported him using that to quell the FLQ back in the 1970s. And yet, with time, over time, more and more people realized that however scared they were, however much they opposed the objectives of a certain group, it was wrong to violate the civil liberties of people to get that job done. And I think this is the same thing. Even if you disagree, and again, these people are fundamentally sympathetic. These are not, terrorists. They're not. But even if you disagree with them and some of their motives, I think in time we will realize that what Donald Trump is proposing will be an overreach. That's my view. Exalted Lioness says, do you ever have open streams, Christo, like we can join and talk with you? I haven't really done that yet, Exiled Lioness. I know some YouTubers do that. They have like a phone line you can call in. I have to think of the logistics around that and maybe talk to some of those folks, because, you want to make sure it's safe. You want to make sure that there's some kind of system there. Some of these channels have like more people working, like they have, for lack of a better term, they have staff, right? So like somebody can be almost like a switchboard operator. I would have to look into a way of doing that. Right now that's not in the immediate plans, but it could be something I do in the future. I know like Majority Report with Sam Cedar and Michael Brooks and all them. They do this. I know David Pakman at least does this sometimes, but they have infrastructure behind them that I don't have, right? I get 26,000 subs basically, and those guys have at least 10, sometimes 30 times the subs I have, right? So, it's a different ball game at that size. John Bartlett says, this was a crazy week, my man. The Walmart in my area got raided. It certainly is wild. What we're seeing is wild right now. It's not something I can remember seeing in my lifetime in Canada or in the United States. What happens in the world, but not in a context that I know, if that makes any sense. And so, this is very interesting. And I don't know. I don't know what's gonna happen next. Yeah, as Lonnie notes, I take, so what I try to do on my live streams, especially as they get bigger, I can't answer every question I get. When I had smaller streams, I would go through and sort of do the questions. Now what I try to do is, of course, I answer questions from super chats. I try to answer questions and comments from a lot of my channel members because it highlights my comment here. And I do try to answer questions just from people posting them. But, the stream moves so fast. When I'm answering a question or I'm looking something up, I don't always see them. So yeah, I don't do direct call-ins, but I do my best to get to people's questions. Adam asks, hey, Christo, do you think protests like the one that happened in Montreal will continue elsewhere in Canada? I do, Adam. I mean, like, the Montreal one was a bit more intense. The police, I think, escalated, whereas they haven't really in Toronto, and I know there was one in Vancouver, and there was also, I believe, something in Calgary. I know here in Kingston, we're going to have something next week or so. And so in Canada, you're going to see some protests in solidarity with George Floyd, but also connected to the recent incident in Toronto where a woman, quote unquote, fell off a balcony, but people suspect it was more that she was pushed by law enforcement. Certainly, whatever you believe there, the wounds are open. And it's also going to be connected generally to police brutality against Indigenous Canadians. And so I think that you're going to see this George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, the American context to be directly linked into some of the struggles in Canada. And so, yeah, I don't expect these marches to go anywhere. Canadians, I mean, I think Canadians take the social distancing guidelines a bit more seriously. I mean, I don't want to stereotype, but it seems to me like a bunch of people would have gone, but then didn't because of the social distancing. Like my wife and I don't think we're gonna go to the one in Kingston, frankly, because of social distancing. I don't know. We haven't made that decision yet. But the point is that like you know, these are unique times for like 4 different reasons. Adam Burke says like there's one in Ottawa scheduled for this Friday, and I'm wondering if that is going to escalate. Adam, I mean, I'm not sure, right? Like, as always, when you go to these things, I'm just gonna grab some water. I'll be right back. Like as always with these events, you want to be safe. You want to keep awareness. You don't want to find yourself in the middle of something that is unsafe to you and to your loved ones or your friends that you're there with. From my perspective, at least in the United States, the police have been the ones to escalate and agitate. So I would say be especially wary of the police starting something with you or trying to goad you into something. I would say that you want to practice safety if you go with people. Again, Kiwana says, say somebody steal the microphone. Yeah, sorry, I just had to get some water there. You want to ensure that when you go, you find a way to a rendezvous point. So if you're going with a group of 2 or 3 or 4 people, then you want to say, okay, let's meet at this coffee shop, or let's meet at this park, or let's meet at the subway station, or let's meet at the bus stop, or whatever. Let's meet the person we're staying with, let's meet there. You want to have all these things. Whether or not you think it's going to be a routine protest, you're right that this context is so different with the COVID, the tensions down south. The Montreal one was pretty intense. The Toronto one was fairly routine. So you never know. I mean, I've been to lots of marches that are basically like, they're glorified parades. They often have permits, but even when they don't, everyone just sort of like goes on with their day. Police might come by, they might watch you. They're probably gathering basic intel. How many people were there? Was there any chicanery going on? And then everyone goes home after the march. That might not happen though, and I think it's important to be safe. Also think about leaving your phone home, or ensuring that your phone has actual passwords and not simply a thumb/facial recognition thing on it, because those latter ones, I believe, are not protected. Police can compel you to open such phones. They can't compel you to put a password in, so you want to do all those things to protect yourself. Or to bring like a burner phone. If you do happen to have a second phone with no information on it, maybe consider bringing that as well. These sorts of things that you need. Deborah saying, keep the border closed, please, Trudeau. I mean, at least for, I think, the next few weeks, the border isn't reopening. I know they're planning, Trudeau was hinting at limited reopenings for family reunification. Now, I don't have the details there, of course. I don't know how many people that would be, but like, let's be real. There's a lot of people that live in Canada with family in the USA and vice versa. Like, there's a ton. And so you would have to be very, cognizant of the fact that, opening up any border between Canada and the US, given how close the two countries are in like historical and economic terms, that even a limited reopening is going to lead to a lot of people all across the continent going in and out of Canada and the US. And for the most part, Canada's done a better job at handling the COVID-19. We've had some real bad spots. Our seniors' homes and long-term care homes have been ravaged. And cities like Toronto and especially Montreal have not done well at all. But in general, we've done pretty well. And so I think a lot of Canadians are wary that if the border does reopen with the US, where there's been less testing per capita and there's been more cases per capita and more fatalities per capita, and the guidelines have been more lax in general, and more sporadic, that opening the border up is going to be dangerous for Americans too, frankly, but Canadians don't feel safe. And I'm not trying to be a smug Canadian here. I'm very critical of Canadians that think they're better than the United States, especially when progressive Canadians act like that, because I feel like they ignore our own problems. But, Canadians and their trust of the United States is at an all-time low. Like, Canadians do not trust the United States because the vast majority of Canadians do not like Donald Trump. And so opening up the border now would not be seen as a popular decision. Not in any way. And this was even before the George Floyd thing, where most Canadians are critical of that. Most Canadians see that as excessive force by the Trump regime and things like that. So there's a whole lot of things happening there that are very interesting and very concerning to folks. So Canadian border, I don't expect it to open too soon. I don't know. That's just me. I mean, I don't like sand says, it's a good one. I'm waiting for the political cartoon of Americans trying to climb over Trump's wall to get into Mexico. Yeah, I mean, the Canadian political cartoons have been pretty hard on Trump. Let me find it. I can get a link for you. Let me look this up. DeAdder. Michael DeAdder is a fairly prominent Canadian political cartoonist. Let me get the link here. I'm going to drop this, guys, to you. What you see is a picture of Donald Trump with his knee over a car, with his knee in the back of the neck of the Statue of Liberty, basically, right? And so that's what you're seeing right there. Just to keep that in mind is what we're noticing. Now, is that provocative? Certainly. But I think a lot of Canadians feel that way. And I think a lot of Americans probably feel that way as well, right? That they are worried about overreach, right? They're worried about overreach. Let me know what you guys think of that comment. Yeah, well, Deborah makes a good point. There was some polling done about when Canadians would feel comfortable, going to the United States, right? When Canadians would be ready to go back. And very few people said that if they could go now, the border's closed for most people, they would go today. And very few people would say they would go in the next year. And so I think that, Americans still have a lot of trust for Canada, but it's not necessarily reciprocal right now because of what we're seeing. So I wonder if when the border does reopen, it'll be really interesting. If Canadian tourist towns that get a lot of Americans, there are certain towns near the border that really their bread and butter is American tourists, right? Americans come, they spend their money, they rent cottages, they go to all the gift shops and all those sorts of things. They fill the bed and breakfasts, all of that for all the summer months. And there's a lot of towns in the U.S. that are just like that, but for Canadians, where there's border towns and things like that. Or going down to Florida. A lot of seniors in Canada basically live their summers in Florida and in like other parts of the U.S. South where it's winter. Sorry, my wife is correcting me. Yeah, they're winter. Sorry, we call them snowbirds. Actually, is what we call them. I don't know if those snowbirds are going back next summer or this next winter. I don't know if they'll be allowed to or if they'll be willing. And so it's going to be really interesting, the economic effects of Canadians and their distrust of the status quo in the United States. Hockey says that person is a Trudeau fan. Look, I don't know if D'Adder is... D'Adder, I'm not sure what his political allegiances are. He strikes me as somebody who's something of a centrist, but I'm not sure. Certainly not a leftist. Certainly not a leftist. But look, to a certain degree, there is hypocrisy from liberal Canadians. When I say liberal, I don't mean left. You have to be very clear here. I mean liberal as in centrist corporate, like Democrat types. Your Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer sort of liberal, who would, frankly, ignore the fact that some of the things Trump is doing, although not all of those things, did not start under Donald Trump. And they likely won't end under Trump, whether or not Trump is replaced by a Democrat or a Republican. Yeah, there is that hypocrisy. I won't deny it. Certainly. But I think there's a lot of people in Canada on the left who have been critical of every American president and what they've done. Canadians on the left have been very critical of George W. Bush and Barack Obama and Donald Trump. And people on, again, when I say the left, I do not necessarily mean supporters of the center-right Liberal Party in Canada, but I do mean that people who identify as on the left, people in the NDP, sort of like our Bernie Sanders party, and people to the left of that, of course. So I can fully acknowledge the let me pull that up. Somebody's asking for my Discord link. I can certainly acknowledge that there's a certain kind of corporate liberal hypocrisy, but I don't find myself privy to that because, again, a lot of people assume, and I've noted this before, a lot of people assume that if you criticize Donald Trump, then you are actually a what is it? Like you must be an Obama lover. You have to be. There's no other reason. That's my Discord link, Garrett, guys. It's just right there. Like, you say Donald Trump's really bad, but what about Obama? And people sometimes never envision you saying Obama sucked too, right? Or vice versa, where somebody's like, Obama's awful, and then they're like, oh, you must be a Russian bot, or you must be a Trumper who hates science or whatever. And he's like, no, Trump sucks too, right? Like, this is like people get stuck in this duopoly, dichotomy, right? Where everyone thinks that you can't say something mean about Trump without implicitly being pro-Obama. People will often say here, because I have like Trudeau books back here. I mean, I wrote a book on Trudeau, his father, very critical of Pierre Trudeau. People assume, even in Canada still, where we have more established third parties, that when I criticize Trudeau, it means I must be pro Andrew Scheer and the Conservatives, or vice versa. Yeah, that's how it is. Well, yeah, Obama did suck. Yeah, Neurozing, I've never denied it on this channel. Obama did suck. He did. I mean, he did some things that were okay at times, somewhat. But yeah, he was not good, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, Obama wasn't a good president. Like, I don't even know if, like, Obama, he did awful things, violated civil liberties, had a absolute majority with a super majority, way stronger control of government from 2008 to 2010 than Trump had from 2016 to 2018, and didn't do nearly enough for the people that actually elected him, working class people, poor people, young people. Betrayed them all for the big banks and things like that. Yeah. So you'll like, this is a thing, I think, whether it's corporate Democrats or whether it's conservatives, you don't understand that leftists hate you both. Like, we hate both your guys. Like, we don't like Trump or Obama. We don't like Trudeau or Scheer. We don't like either. Right? It's a Yeah, Melanie, you're right. Obama should have gotten Medicare for all, or at the very least, like, why wasn't he demanding a public option like Biden is now? Like, at the very least, a public option, right? Yeah, like drone strikes, of course. There's a whole bunch of things. Christian mission, that's BS, man. Donald Trump himself denied the fact that Obama was American. From the day he was elected, people were comparing him to a goddamn monkey because he's black. The vitriol Obama got questioned his fundamental humanity. So I have to fundamentally disagree with you that the man didn't get vitriol. The man's fundamental humanity was questioned by millions of people, led by Donald Trump and led by people in the mainstream media. Fox News listeners don't want to hear this, nor do liberals, but Fox is mainstream media. Same as MSNBC. And they were talking about birther conspiracies. They were talking about Obama wearing a suit weird. They talked about Obama getting Dijon mustard. It's too fancy. Doesn't understand a working man. Mustard spicy. He got more vitriol. He got more. Okay. Trump gets more vitriol, but Trump, guys, we've got to be honest. Trump deserves more vitriol. He does. Obama sucked, but Trump is worse. He's worse than Obama on most issues, most of the time. Simple as that. And the thing here is, like, Trump, the only reason Trump is president, Christian mission, is because there wasn't enough vitriol aimed at Trump when he was running. The media just played his lies and propaganda, giving him hundreds of millions of dollars of free advertising, and they didn't correct him when he lied. People, like, and I'm not going to use the term Dafrax because even that's like, people were suggesting that Michelle Obama was a secret man. Right? Like, to suggest that there was no vitriol aimed at Obama is absurd. It's absurd. They were calling Obama a communist. They were saying he was a literal communist. Remember death panels? They literally said they want you to die. And yet now it's Republicans saying grandma and grandpa should throw themselves on the altar and so we can sacrifice them to the god of capitalism. There's the death panel for you. So, like, look, I hate defending Barack Obama. Absolutely, positively, in my gut, hate defending Barack Obama. But if you think that Trump has gotten a harder go of the media, if he has, it's because he deserves it. It's because he deserves it. That's my viewpoint. That's my viewpoint. John Barlich with an interesting question here. It says, which president to you is underrated? Mine is Truman because he had a very, very tough discussion and a fair deal and had things for African Americans, but acknowledged he had stuff was bad on foreign policy. I mean, underrated presidents, maybe people whose accomplishments and skill sets were sort of underrated. Yeah, Truman probably would be an underrated president in some ways. I mean, Yeah, Winston Smith bringing up the Tea Party. That's a good point. I mean, other people have said that some other presidents like Jimmy Carter were maybe more forward-looking than he got credit for, and he didn't always get the sort of kudos for what he did. I'm not saying I want 100% there. Underrated presidents could still be presidents that, did good things, but like that are already well known, but maybe are even greater than they're given credit for. Like you might even say that Lyndon Johnson might be underrated because of how much was accomplished under his government. It's not always it also depends on what you mean, right? Do you mean great president or underrated president in terms of achieved things I believed in? Or do you mean like if there's an objective, like a good president is somebody who gets elected to implement a vision and successfully implements that vision, whether or not I agree with them? Or is a good president somebody whose mission eventually becomes accepted as the public as the right way to do things, even if it's rejected at the time? So you might say that presidents that, left unpopular, but over time became popular, maybe they're underrated. And maybe presidents that, were popular at the time, but the people eventually turned on them, maybe they're overrated. But I don't think Truman's a necessarily a bad pick, personally. Maria asks with a great question, and thanks for your support. John, thanks for your support as well again. She asks, do you think Biden will pick Ms. Obama for vice president? I don't think he will, but honestly, if she was willing, he might have. I really do think that if she wanted to, Michelle Obama could have run and win the nomination and win the presidency. And that's regardless of the fact of what I think of her or her political views and all this and all that. I think she's very popular and she's very qualified. She has a lot of background. She's has a lot of achievements on her own. She probably, if she was going to run for president, she might try to do what Hillary did and, run for Congress, run for Senate, run for some position before doing it. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if she was willing that she would be picked. And I think what Biden has said is, look, I would pick her in a heartbeat, but she doesn't want the job. And, I know people say that, like you often say before you are going to run, sometimes people will say, well, actually, I'm not. And then, because you want to control your message. But I really don't believe Michelle Obama at this stage in her life wants to run for office. And I think that's a big factor. Now, will she run in the future? I mean, Michelle Obama is only, let me look up. Michelle Obama is only 56 years old. In American politics, like, she's a baby. Like she's got 20 years before she's as old as Biden and Bernie and Trump and those people are. Like, she's got a long time to build a political career to become president. I mean, Barack Obama, his political career was basically like 20 years long, right? So Michelle Obama has lots of time to do politics if she wants. I don't think it's going to be Hillary Clinton either. I actually think Kamala Harris is the favorite now. Can I get an amen? I think that's I really do think that one. I think some people historians rank him high because of, rank Woodrow Wilson high because some of the things he did were accepted by the world, but he was ahead of American standards on things like international diplomacy. But it's also the case that maybe historians like Woodrow Wilson, because he was also a historian and he was one of our own, I think that might play a bit of a role. In Canadian prime ministerial rankings, often Mackenzie King is near the top. He was a longtime prime minister who was... In Canada, we don't have term limits, so he was prime minister basically from 1921 to 25, 1930 to 35, and 1935 to 1948. So we don't have term limits in Canada. We don't have term limits in Canada. Somebody asked if some of the YouTube channels aren't talking about race because they don't want to alienate conservative supporters. I mean, I can't speak to that. Most of the channels I've been following, like, have been talking about it. Like, I know David Dole, he's been releasing his normal amount of videos, and he's been talking about the protests and race, and I know that Majority Report has as well, I believe. So I haven't necessarily seen this. I mean, I don't know. Maybe some of the channels feel that like they were pro Bernie, and then they were criticizing a lot of the other Democrats, and Republicans came to watch them criticize other Democrats, and now they have to shift. Even if they're not going to be pro Biden, they're going to be covering Trump more now, and they're going to be doing it negatively, and so they don't want to lose those people. Maybe, but I haven't seen that. I haven't seen that personally. Maria, again, with the kind of a somewhat of a follow-up. Do you think Jose Mojica, I think that might be the way of saying it, Maria, has been a good president in Uruguay? Maria, I mean, I would love to give you an answer, but to be perfectly honest, I am not nearly an expert. I have heard great things about him. He was, a great leader in terms of representing regular people. I know he was often seen as the poorest president in the world. He lived a genuine working class lifestyle. He wasn't a person who pretended to be blue collar. He was actually a working person. But in terms of like the nitty gritty on his governance, I don't know nearly enough about Uruguay. But Uruguay is one of the more successful South American countries. And I've heard nothing bad about Jose, so I would say he probably did do a great job. He's a lot of the other leaders in Latin America, everything's very controversial. I've heard nothing bad about him personally. Gene says, thank you for joining the Discord. Yes, if you guys want to join the Discord, it's a great place to have some discussions. I've seen that some new people have already joined. We already have 1, 2, 3, I think 4 people have joined. That's pretty good. That's a pretty good bump. Will Warren be picked? Somebody saying. I don't think Warren's going to get picked. I'm not saying it's impossible. She's definitely on the list. It's just like Warren didn't win her own state. Warren is still probably a little bit too left-wing for Biden, even if she's not that left. Warren is from the northeast, which like Biden's going to win most, if not all, of the states in that area of the country, and often by big margins. So he doesn't need Warren. And Warren's also like 70. Warren's like old, right? She's an older person herself. Biden being in his later 70s, I think it's especially important that he picks somebody young and a little bit more energetic. And so while out of all the people he's actually talking about, I think Warren is the least worse, I still don't think he's going to pick her. I actually thought she was going to, or Biden was going to pick Klobuchar. But now I'm not so sure. Given that a lot of black voters have said, look, Joe, we don't want Klobuchar. We want a black woman, but especially Amy Klobuchar is just not exciting for us. Like, she's not even a good pick if you are going to pick a non-black woman. And she, whether it's directly her fault or not, she is now irrevocably connected to the George Floyd thing because she was, part of the prosecutorial district attorney regime during Derek Chauvin's earlier career and didn't do anything to stop him and other cops like him. And so, again, whether you think it's fair or not, people are going to say it's Amy Klobuchar's fault in part about what happened last week. And again, politics isn't always about what's right or wrong or fair or unfair. It's about what's perceived by voters. And I think she's done. I think so. I think she was probably, if I was going to bet, I would have bet on Amy Klobuchar. But now my bet is with Kamala Harris. I think it's with Kamala Harris. Again, I'm not elated by that, although I do think she's better than Klobuchar. But that's who I think is going to be the nominee. She's young. you know, another thing why he wouldn't pick Warren, guys, is that the current governor is a Republican, and if they do win, then they lose a Senate seat because that senator will be replaced. The governor will replace Warren with a Republican. Whereas if he picks Klobuchar and or Kamala Harris, the governors are Democratic, and they'll have a Democratic governor. I don't think he's going to pick Tulsi. Tulsi, she does deliver some things. Again, she is young. She is racialized. That does help, but she doesn't really deliver any states, and she's not part of like a key demographic like Kamala Harris is to the same degree. Tulsi Gabbard's also in an interesting position. Like, the theory behind Tulsi was that she'd be great at getting soft Republicans and independents. Yet, when they did polling during the primaries, she was extremely unpopular with Democrats. And she wasn't that popular with independents or Republicans to balance it out. Right? So, like, the person that was most popular with independents and Republicans was, of course, Bernie Sanders, who has the only major politician running for president that had true mass appeal, which is why a lot of us backed him. I don't think he's going to pick Tulsi. I don't think so. I feel like her no vote on impeachment was very unpopular with rank and file Democrats, or not her no vote, her abstention. I think, she might play a role in a Biden administration, but she's not going to be VP. She's not going to be VP. There's no way. There's no way. There's no way. I honestly think it's going to be like my list like a week or two ago before this all started was like Klobuchar, Kamala Harris, Gretchen Whitmer, the governor from Michigan, Elizabeth Warren, Stacey Abrams. I know a lot of people were laughing about Stacey Abrams here and how she thought how she reacted when she was on that live stream with Biden. I made a big video about that. But I do think she's on the list. And there was a couple other people like Val Dennings, but I really do think it's going to be one of those 4 or 5 women. And I think Klobuchar is out. Yeah, and I do think Kamala Harris is better than Tim Kaine. I think Amy Klobuchar is very Tim Kaine-like to me. Right? I think that I think she's very much like Tim Kaine. John Bartlett says, super chat here says, Amy K should drop out. Well, I mean, I think she should resign from the Senate, frankly. Personally, I don't think that's going to happen. I guess she could come out and say, I am withdrawing I'm withdrawing my desire to be considered for vice president. She could say that. But I wonder if that would just create more controversy for Biden and connect her to Biden, even though that would be the opposite intent. I honestly think what's going to happen is she's not going to be, I don't think she's going to get picked, but Biden's not going to come out against her. He's just going to quietly put her name off the pile. Like she was in the, he had a list of a bunch of people and was sorting them in the piles. And now Amy Klobuchar is going to be quietly moved into the no pile. And Biden's not going to reference it. Like he's not going to call her out necessarily, but he's not there. I don't think he's going to pick her anymore. That's my view. Maybe I'm wrong. But I don't think there's going to be any formal dropping out for Amy Klobuchar. I just think she's just off the list of frontrunners now. Anyway, about getting Bernie back in, who asked that? Thomas asked that. I mean, like at this stage, it doesn't look like it, unfortunate as it is. Bernie has made it very clear he's kind of moved into supporting Biden. The nature of the primaries as they exist right now are that, it's difficult for Bernie to campaign in the way he's most successful. As we go further, more and more, Biden comes closer and closer to winning an outright majority of delegates, which would allow him to lock up the nomination, whether we like it or not. I mean, the only way is that if you could somehow force Biden to drop out due to scandal or due to the fact that you convince him it's the right thing to do, and then hope that Bernie's able to convince the delegates. But then there's no guarantee that the neoliberal delegates combined wouldn't just skip Bernie and pick somebody else entirely, whether it's somebody else who ran or whether it's Cuomo or whether it's anybody else. So I don't know. Like, look, I'm not saying like people who are trying to push Bernie and people who want to keep fighting shouldn't keep fighting. If I was like, I would still go and vote for Bernie in your primary if you still have that opportunity, if your primary hasn't run yet. But I also don't want people to have this false hope that like it's only going to take a little bit and Bernie can jump back in, because I think that, I don't know. I don't want to give people false hope at this stage. There's still 17 states left. Yeah, you're right. There's still a lot to go, but Bernie would have to win by a gargantuan margin, and I just don't see it. And another thing now is, like, if you think the mainstream media was ignoring Bernie before, Bernie jumping back in right now, it's not only coronavirus, it's also this national protest wave, Donald Trump's response in it, right? Bernie will get snuffed out. Like, even if it was, like, the media is rigged against Bernie, but even if it wasn't, there's just so much happening right now, it would be hard to break through. Comrade Internet saying Bernie should just declare himself interim president, sort of do a Juan Guaido. I mean, look, if what we're seeing in Venezuela is enough to justify calling for a coup, then all of the things we've seen in the United States, I would say, justify intervention as well. That's my perspective, at least. Who knows if that'll happen, of course. But right now, I do think that we're not going to see Bernie jump in, unfortunately. I'm not going, Paul K. I'm not with the rhetoric that Bernie sold people out. Look, now is not the time to throw away the most steadfast progressive in modern American history to have such success. I disagree with how Bernie dropped out. Anybody who's sad Bernie endorsed Biden, I have to be honest with you, Bernie made that clear from the very beginning. I'm endorsing the nominee, right? So to expect anything else, that's just the reality. Bernie made that promise. If you didn't like that promise, then you shouldn't have supported Bernie because you knew that was an eventuality. But I can agree that Bernie was far too quick to join Biden. And I disagreed heavily, and I said so on the channel, that I was very, frankly, angry with Bernie when he said that if his supporters don't get behind Biden, they're irresponsible. And I much preferred the tone of Bernie in 2016. Bernie was very correct when he said, look, I said I would endorse Hillary Clinton. And I kept my promise, and he did. And he worked very hard for Hillary. He worked harder for Hillary than sometimes Hillary worked for Hillary. But he said, ultimately, I could tell my supporters to vote for him, or to vote for her. I could tell my supporters why it's important to vote for Hillary. I can tell my supporters that there's good things Hillary is doing, even if I don't agree with even if we have different visions. I can say that you need to vote for her to stop Trump and all this and all that. But ultimately, the responsibility to win my voters is on Clinton and her campaign. I can do everything in the world to help that process, but it's on her. Like Bernie said, I will never tell you who to vote for, but if I do, you probably shouldn't listen to me. You should vote for who you want to vote for, and I'll give you advice, but I'm not, this movement isn't a army march. This movement is a movement. And I think Bernie 2020 took the wrong tone. And I think that made a lot of people very angry. So I still have a great deal of respect for Bernie, admiration for Bernie. 30, 40 years from now, I think Bernie is going to be seen as a harbinger of a better world. That's my hope. the greatest Canadian, for my Canadian viewers, you guys will know this, but the greatest Canadian ever, according to a CBC survey, they did it in the early 2000s. They did like this national poll, and they found that the greatest Canadian of all time was never prime minister. He was Tommy Douglas. He was basically a governor from Saskatchewan, or what we call premiers, who became the federal leader of the NDP, basically Canada's left-wing third party. That, usually gets 15 to 20% of the vote. So way bigger than any American third party, but like they're not often in contention to win a federal, like nationwide election. And yet, because he was ahead of the time on everything from healthcare to human rights to civil liberties to other forms of social programs, when, they did this survey, it was Tommy Douglas. It was Tommy Douglas, right? And they picked Tommy Douglas because he envisioned a Canada that people weren't ready for. And that's the NDP, and that's, I think, what Bernie Sanders is going to be. The greatest politicians often envision a world that the people aren't ready for yet. And that really, really sucks because people don't vote for them. I mean, people did vote for Tommy Douglas. His party, again, was able to consistently get, a good support from a bunch of Canadians, millions of Canadians. More successful than any third party in the U.S. has ever been, ever. But, after, he passed away and after, the socialist leaders in Canada before him, like J.S. Woodsworth, passed away, their ideas became implemented. The idea that Asian Canadians should be allowed to vote, they weren't at first. The idea that Indigenous people should have rights, the idea that every Canadian should have health care, the idea that there should be better protections for workers, make it easier for workers to join unions, make it higher minimum wages. All these things came from the left in Canada. And Bernie's like that. I really do feel that Bernie is like that in some ways, guys. Like, Bernie Sanders is in some ways talking about things that maybe the political establishment isn't ready for yet, but they will come. They will come. They will come, right? Christoph K says, the greatest Canadian ever is Christo Aivalis. That is objectively false. Christoph, I'm going to 100% disagree with you here. I'm not even the greatest Canadian in my house, let alone my country. I think my wife has the inside track on that one in my home. But I thank you for the compliment nonetheless. So I think Bernie's like that. I do. Like, yeah, and like, Emily, that's fair. You could disagree with the endorse no matter what promise, right? But like, some people were shocked that he did endorse Biden. And I was like, well, if you're shocked that he endorsed Biden, then like, you weren't paying attention. I mean, to be fair, I think it was fair for people to be disappointed that he did it so quickly, that he did it so unreservedly. But I mean, if you didn't want the endorsement to happen, period, then like, I don't know what to tell people, right? Yeah, Paul K, again, like, you don't have to vote for Biden to, like, people don't have to explain their electoral decisions on this channel. So, like, again, like, Bernie's almost like he sees into the future of what people need. Bernie's been right about things forever. And I know that sucks, but like, there are politicians like that have been right forever, and they often don't get the credit. But without them, the changes would have never happened. Christoph K. Yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah, 100%. I know you're just fooling around. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Common internet, fuck the establishment. Look, I mean, I don't disagree. Hockey. Bernie's not a grifter. Like, Bernie can't do anything with that money. Like Bernie is like Bernie can't buy stuff with that money. He can use it to fund his Senate campaigns, like his own. But like Bernie doesn't run competitive Senate campaigns. Like Bernie, like what Bernie did after his campaign was take care of all of his staff's health care for the duration of the election, as opposed to Michael Bloomberg, who promised everyone he would pay them until November 3rd, whether or not he was still running by then. And then once he dropped out, he told them to screw off, and he left all his workers hanging during a global freaking pandemic. Bernie Sanders is spending his money, I think, appropriately. He raised a ton of money, yes, but he didn't raise it under false pretenses. And yes, Bernie Sanders has sent out a fundraising email under the DNC email list, which, you know, you can disagree with that or agree with that, whatever. But Bernie has not tapped his own donors for money for Biden or for the Democratic Party in general. He has sent out a donation call for Ilhan Omar, AOC, and Rashida Tlaib specifically, but only those women, right? Like his allies. So he has fundraised on his own list since suspending, but not for Biden, not for the Democratic Party generally. Lonnie says, as a fellow married man, great answer, Christo. Brianna is just gave me a great look over there. Robbie says, what is the next worst decision that Trump will take? Robbie, I don't know, man. I don't know. Look, like, I don't want to say something jokingly and then we come back here 3 or 4 days from now, 2 days from now, when I do my regular Wednesday night stream, and we find out that Joe Biden or excuse me, Donald Trump has done that thing, right? Like, you know, like he's, you know, I don't know. I'm not, guys. I was gonna try to say something, but I'm not going to. And Ayanna Presley can for BTF. I forget what that stands for being a Warren shill. I mean, look, Ayanna Presley is more inconsistent. I mean, she's still more progressive than the vast majority of Democratic Congress people. She is. She's still on the left. But yeah, I disagree with her, obviously, on endorsing Warren. Like, on the left of that party, not on the left in the broad scheme. I mean, I do feel bad for her in a sense because Warren didn't even endorse her. Now, to be fair, Ayanna Presley is running unopposed. So, I mean, I still think you should offer to endorse and fundraise for her if you believe in her, because she might not always be running unopposed, or if she wants to run for the Senate, you want to give her the ability to do so. But she's not facing a primary, and she's not even facing, I think, a Republican. I literally think she's going to be the only one on the ballot. Like, it's one of those rare districts that's so one-sided that they don't even bother to run an opponent. Which is very interesting, because we don't have that in Canada. There's no riding in this country where any less than 3 or 4 parties runs. In our riding, we have, I think, at least 5 parties run. The Conservatives, the Liberals, the NDP, the Greens, and then usually, like, we had the People's Party, which is a new thing, and then often other parties as well. Paolo asks of the super chat, a great question. Great question. What makes an excellent president or prime minister? And what can Trump do in order to become the best of their country? How about Trudeau say something like solve global warming? Again, it depends on your philosophy. Is your philosophy what makes a great PM or president implementing a vision I agree with? Well, then with like Trump, it would be, for me, it would be don't be Donald Trump. Like, just drink a potion and become Bernie Sanders and just start doing everything different. Now, you might also say being a great president is somebody that, again, has a vision and implements their vision effectively, builds a legacy, creates a society in their image. And I think for Trump, if he was going to do that, he failed because from the very beginning, his approach was too abrasive. He failed to uphold a lot of the norms that he needed to uphold, and norms that wouldn't even have endangered his political project. And if anything, it would have made it more possible to actually get the things done he wanted to do. So like Trump, for instance, should have put his entire business in a blind trust. Every other president has done that in modern history. Jimmy Carter, I think, sold his peanut farm because it was too politically risky for him to own a peanut farm back in the 1970s when he was president. And so I do think that Donald Trump, from the very beginning, putting his children in top positions even though they weren't qualified, basically using his business, using the presidency as a tool to make money for his business, whether or not you agree with Trump's ideology, all of these things Trump did from the very beginning created distractions and scandals and distrust that made it harder for him to implement his vision. And I think if you are, even if you, let's say, I don't have a lot of pro-Trump viewers, but let's say you are pro-Donald Trump, and let's say you really believe in Trump's vision. The fact of the matter is, Donald Trump has been awful administratively. Many appointments have gone unfilled. Many appointments have gone filled with under or unqualified people. Donald Trump failed to keep staff up in things like disease control, one of the consequences of which is the U.S. has more COVID deaths than any other country in the world. And so even if you agree with Trump's ideology, even if you do want to make America great again, Trump would need to become a much better traditional political administrator if he wanted to be a great president. Because even if his ideology, even if his viewpoints somehow do become accepted as good and as mainstream by the time he leaves office or in the decades after, he will always be seen as incompetent from an administrative perspective. Even people that agree with his vision, I think in the long term will realize that Trump was awful at implementing it. And I think that's a big thing. I mean, if you want to go with big projects, like doing something that creates a legacy, then yeah, meaningful moves on global warming is a big one. Finding a way to address healthcare, both in Canada and the US, is a big one. Healthcare is not a solved issue in Canada. Any president that can solve that's big. And I think from my perspective, what makes a prime minister or president great is, do they have the ability to implement a vision, and does that vision hold in the long term? Were they successful at implementing a project, and over the coming decades and generations, how has that project been upheld both in concrete terms and in the public's memory? So someone like FDR, even though part of his project was torn down by neoliberalism, has been much more successful than some other presidents who, when they left, a lot of their programs were taken down. You know what I mean? And I think or just easily reversed. Obamacare doesn't really have a legacy. The day Trump became president, he started weakening Obamacare. The Affordable Care Act still technically exists, but it's a shell. Whereas the creation of Social Security, even if it's underfunded, even if it's not as good as it could or should be, FDR created Social Security, and it's one of the enduring legacies of the entire American political system. That's success. What is Trump going to have? He doesn't even get his wall. What's Trump's legacy right now? What is his legacy in a concrete sense? He doesn't have one. And I think that's a major issue. Lonnie, I think a lot of us were disappointed with the South Carolina thing. I think what was interesting about all of this was Bernie was unlucky with the timing of everything. Certainly, African American voters in South Carolina liked Biden. But the narrative that Bernie didn't have support among black people going into that vote wasn't true. I mean, that was a narrative the media was spinning, right? The issue was that Bernie, like with white people and all people, was popular with young folks, but not with older folks. And in South Carolina, the electorate, black and white, for the Democratic primary is older than usual and more conservative or more moderate than usual. And so what happened, unsurprisingly, is that Biden won South Carolina. We all knew it was going to happen. Bernie was not going to win South Carolina. Nobody realistically thought that. But then everyone spun the narrative that Biden is the only, Bernie has no support among black people, even though going into South Carolina, not in South Carolina, but going into that primary, the national polling had Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden in a statistical tie for black voters. Because yes, older black voters in the South were with Biden, but younger black voters and black voters in more progressive areas of the country were with Bernie, right? And what ended up happening was Bernie lost South Carolina, the neoliberals all coalesced around him, the narrative was set, Biden got tens of millions of dollars of free advertising over that 3 or 4 day window, and I really do feel like the momentum was shifted. I really do feel like in a hypothetical universe where the next state is, say, a large black population state, but one in the north, then maybe things are different. Like maybe things are different. Who knows? Yeah, Bob makes a great point. Like here in Canada, we have a lot of issues, right? Like we still have a lot of things we need to solve around healthcare. Bob says if you're poor in Canada and you need a root canal, like you just suffer. You don't get it fixed. That's the reality. Like if you don't have dental insurance, and in Canada you get dental insurance in the same way you get health insurance in the States, it's like you have to hope that your spouse has it or your parents do when you're under 25, and that you're provided, like you work for a company and then they provide you dental insurance and medicine. And so in Canada, yeah, you can go to the doctor for free and they'll tell you you're sick. They'll tell you you need medicine and they'll write you a prescription. All of that is free. It's covered through the single payer system. But if you don't have the money to get that prescription, then you know you're sick and you know what's doing it and you know how to fix it, but you can't actually get the prescription you need. Right? 1 million Canadians a year can't get the medicine they need. And 4 to 6 million Canadians a year can't get the dental care they need. Now, you have to remember, Canada's about 1/10 the population. So that means 40 to 60 million Americans, the equivalent, don't have dental. Right? That's like, Canada's got massive issues. Massive issues. I mean, there certainly was voter suppression during the primaries. I'm not suggesting that if that was the only issue that was playing a role, but it's not, everyone saw that, you got massive university campuses with like one polling station, and you're making, people in their 20s, their teens and 20s wait 4 hours to vote. Whereas, boomers in the suburbs, who again were disproportionately Biden, could vote in 20 minutes. It's no wonder that Biden, the Bernie's vote was dragged down a little bit. Now, again, I'm not suggesting that alone would have overturned, some of Biden's biggest victories, but it certainly didn't help or hurt Biden. Yeah, like people can't afford it. Yeah, if you don't have health insurance, the dental work's expensive, especially if you want to get you can get a tooth pulled, but like if you want to actually get a cavity dealt with and a root canal and get it prepared and get all the things you need to have that. It's just if you don't have dental insurance, you don't get fixed. And again, like with American healthcare, it's like you can have insurance, but it doesn't cover that, or it covers it, but you still got to put down a $300 deductible, or it covers it, but it's going to take you 3 months to get your money back because, insurance companies don't pay out that quick sometimes. And so you got to put it on credit card for months and months and months. And so there's all these barriers that shouldn't exist. Healthcare should be 100% free at the point of access. And not just doctors and hospitals, but medicine and dentists and optical care and all of these things. And it's not in Canada, not in the United States. So guys, I'm probably chat's slowing down a little bit. I'm slowing down a little bit. This was really good. I just wanted to get together and talk a bit about what we were seeing because I think this was really important. I think we're at a stage now in American politics where it is getting pretty ugly. And I'm not an alarmist, but I do have concerns about where this could go. And I do have worries about Trump and this sort of declaration of martial law. And we're going to keep an eye on it. We're going to keep an eye on it. Tomorrow I'll come out with more videos probably. I make videos pretty much every day on this and issues related to it. And then as always, I do a Wednesday night stream. Every Wednesday night, 8 p.m. to about 10:30 or so, 10:30. We talk about politics, what's happened in the last week. Although sometimes we have a theme if something's happening. So that one might be related to the protests we've been seeing. I encourage you to do that, to come to that. Again, same channel. If you want to support the channel and you're new, click subscribe, of course. And if you have subscribed already, I encourage you to click the bell and then turn on all the notifications. That way, whenever I post a video, you should get it. I'll post it again here. If you haven't joined yet, join the Discord. It's a great place to talk to other supporters when we're not streaming and, all of these sorts of things. And for those who want to support the channel in an ongoing fashion, you can become a member on YouTube or via Patreon. I know for a lot of folks, at the best of time, money's tight. But if you have the ability to support the channel and the desire, it helps to grow the channel and it helps to have me cover controversial topics. Because whenever you talk about things like martial law, YouTube loves to throw around the demonetization hammer. So it's supportive of the channel. So guys, thank you so much. I found this was great. Thanks to all the new folks. Thanks to people who were helping to moderate, like Joseph. I don't know if Samantha was here tonight, but yeah, Samantha, of course, was here. All the people who helped moderate and to keep the chat welcoming for everyone, whether they were new or returning. And I will see you guys on Wednesday. Thanks so much.